Hello, guys. Today is Tuesday, September the 22nd. Um, I don't want to take too much of your time today, but I just wanted to get started talking about ancient Greece from an artistic, intellectual, cultural standpoint. And so, if you would please, you have your study guide right here that you could pull up. I'll pull up mine just to help you out. But yes, and there it is. And so, ancient you, Archimedes, the Greeks. Greece is the word. The people, cultural history, and way of thinking of the Greeks, and later their counterpart, the Romans, literally formed the cornerstone of Western civilization. I mean, in a one short, simple sentence, it does. Greece and Rome make up the cornerstone of what we like to think of as Western civilization, the way this culture operates. So many things go directly back to Rome and to Greece, or maybe to Greece through Rome, et cetera, et cetera. In fact, after the Greeks and Romans have died away as a dominant culture, several civilizations will try to recreate them. I mean, come on. If you've ever been to Washington, D.C., or for that matter, Frankfurt, and looked at the Capitol buildings there, do you ever wonder why they have all those columns there and why they're all white and why they all look the same? Answer: because the people who designed them were saying, we want to reflect the legacy of ancient Greece and Rome. So, from our forms of government, which are a direct result of Greco-Roman governments, ancient Greek democracy, Roman republicanism, um, from our forms of government to our way of thinking, philosophy, to our drama. And by drama, like it says there, that means, not just theater, but also television. I mean, any television show that you watch, any movie you watch, is probably a rehash. You know what it is? It's a rehashing of a Shakespearean theme who rehashed ancient Greek plays. I mean, they really did. For example, test question. For example, the plot line of Star Wars Parts 4 and I forget the other one. It might have been Part 1. I think it was Part 1. As well as Independence Day are all rehashings of Homer's The Iliad, the Trojan horse, where, they could not get inside the city of Troy, walls too big, too thick, and so they tricked their way in by leaving this wooden horse. The Greeks, the Trojans, pull the horse inside the city. Inside the horse, there are a select number of Greek warriors, including Achilles. During the night, after everybody's been partying, they slip out, open the door, and slaughter everybody in the city of Troy. Which, by the way, we're going to watch bits and pieces of the film Troy. But anyway, so yeah, I mean, the plot line's the same. So, to our military philosophy, yeah, the Spartans. The first real police state was the Spartans. The first real modern military tactics came from the Spartans. The idea that a line is only as strong as its weakest link came from the Spartans. The first boot camp was the Spartans. In fact, if you go to somebody's house and you look around and you say their furnishings are Spartan, that means that they don't have a lot of furnishings. That means they have very bare necessities. Sparse, you see, comes from the Spartans. Anyway, back to the matter at hand. To our sciences and our fields of inquiry, the way we do it is such an exact copy of these societies that, and here's an important word for you to know, that they, meaning ancient Greece and ancient Rome, are referred to as the classical civilization. Yes, the classical civilizations. What does that word mean, classical? Well, for a lot of people, the first thing that comes into their mind when they hear the word classical, he's going to talk about classical music again. No, we will one day, but not today. Classical, it's classical cars. What is a classic car? What's a classical car? Let's see. The 1968 Camaro, the 1965 Mustang, the 1956 Thunderbird, classic cars. Yeah. What makes them classic? Because basically, ever since they came out, people have been trying to copy them and to recopy them. Yeah, they're classic. Coke classic, you may remember. Back in the good old days in the 80s, the wise guys at Coca-Cola came up with this new Coke. You remember Coca-Cola was first made in the 1890s by an Atlanta pharmacist, and yeah, the Coca in Coca-Cola, traces that it was a drink that was sparkling and refreshing, and I wonder why. But yeah, but a lot of the formula though, after they got rid of the cocaine and decided, this is addicting. The formula has remained the same until, like I said, in the 1980s, one of the wise guys said, "Hey, let's have new Coke. We're going to replace classic Coke with new Coke. It tastes like Pepsi." And they got so many complaints that they rebranded it. And for a while, you had new Coke and classic Coke. And then eventually, new Coke just kind of faded away because nobody liked it. Anyway, so yeah. But it's classical. It's a classic. Everyone's trying to imitate it. And so, yeah, a classical civilization is a civilization that, in fact, the definition of the word classical is something that sets such a high standard that everyone else tries to copy it. And for example, you say, well, how does that mean classical music? Well, and we're going to talk about this later, but I don't know what kind of music you listen to. I know what kind of music I listen to. But I will guarantee you this, that music you listen to was inspired by somebody who was inspired by somebody who was inspired by somebody else and somebody else and somebody else, and can trace its roots back to, yeah, Mozart, Beethoven, Bach, the classical composers. Yeah. And so that's why it's called classical music. It sets a standard so high that everyone else wants to emulate them, wants to be them. So, what special quality did the Greeks embody that made them unique over all the other peoples who preceded them and many who came after them? Well, here's the thing, and you're writing this down because it will be on your test. Here's the thing: the Greeks were the first people to come up with the idea that natural phenomena, and by the way, I put that in your assignment, natural phenomena, that be, a storm, for example, or a famine, or a plague, or a person who becomes sick and dies, or, natural phenomena, what we call natural phenomena. The Greeks were the first people, and when we talk about Greeks, we're not talking about all the Greeks. Fact of the matter is, the Greeks as a whole were a very superstitious people. They had a god for everything, literally. In fact, and I'm all rambling here, the Apostle Paul in the New Testament made one of his early missionary trips to the city of Athens. And as he walked around the city of Athens, he noticed there was a temple to this god and a temple to that god, to Athena, to which is the patron goddess of Athens. But also there were temples to Zeus, temples to Mars, temples to this, temples to Bacchus. And he kept walking, and eventually he came to a temple to the unknown god. The Greeks were so superstitious that they thought that maybe they forgot a god and they didn't want to offend that god. So there's this temple. Don't be offended, because the Greek gods were like that. They were jealous. They weren't, they had very human qualities, not good ones either. We'll talk about that later. But anyway, what in the world was I talking about? Yeah, the most of the Greeks were superstitious. However, a few, the intelligentsia, later on the Socrates, the Platos, people like that, they were the first people to come up with like Plato. They were the first people to come up and say, you know what, maybe all this natural phenomena, sickness, plagues, droughts, storms, earthquakes, maybe it has some kind of natural causes. Now, they had no idea what those natural causes were, but they were trying. For example, Plato came up with the four element theory, that all the earth is made of earth, wind, fire, and water. Yeah, four elements. Now, of course, he's wrong, but he was thinking logically. Much better than the people who thought that you got sick, you had a little frog growing in your stomach. The first people who made conjectures about the blood in the body was a Greek physician by the name of Galen. Galen, for example, thought that blood was created in the liver, and he was right about that. And then it went out into the body's extremities, and the body just consumed it. Now, that's wrong. He didn't know anything about circulation of the blood, but he also didn't have a microscope that could see capillaries, that returns used blood back to the lungs to be replenished. But yeah. All right. Anyway, so yeah, the Greeks began to make those inquiries into math, into science. The Greeks came up with lots of theories, particularly in math and science. The Pythagorean theorem, for example, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. The Greeks came up with that. And all sorts of plane geometry. Euclid invented plane geometry. So when you're in geometry class and doing all those proofs, thank Euclid. I'm being funny. So, Roman numeral 1. The Greeks and the Romans, for all their achievements, were a most hedonistic people. We're going to learn this big word, hedonism, hedonistic. From the words hedonism and hedonistic, we get the word heathen, Heathen. Now, if you know what a heathen is normally it is a person who is considered to be immoral, to be godless. Well, so what does that mean, hedonism? Well, yeah, and once again, the Greeks and Romans, for all their achievements, were hedonists. You say, well, what does that mean? Well, the easiest way to describe hedonism is hedonism means a person who lives by his glands. You say, what does that mean, Mr. Horton? Well, remember that the Greeks and the Romans came before Christ, Christianity, and their principles. And so their principles about morality. And so the Greeks and Romans were not really put off by things like nudity, by things like pedophilia, having sex with children, by basically what hedonism means If it feels good, do it. And so, yeah, if you understand the Greeks and Romans, if you understand that, then you understand a lot about what the Greeks and Romans were at. For example, Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar was once referred, and we all know who Julius Caesar is, the great Roman general / emperor. But Julius Caesar was once referred to as every woman's man and every man's woman. Take a minute, wrap your head around that. But yeah, the Romans were given to have, the Roman emperors were given to having great feast and orgies. Now, I hope I don't have to explain what an orgy is. It's where everybody has sex with everybody else. But also these giant feasts where, the primary central dish, peacock brains of peacocks. Now, how big is a peacock's brain? Well, I don't know. About the size of this. How many peacocks would you have to kill to prepare a banquet for lots of people? I don't even want to think about it. So why? Well, it's something called conspicuous consumption. They ate that because it costs lots of money. Why do people like caviar? I don't know. Stuff is nasty. And yet, a lot of people think, no. And what is caviar? Caviar is fish eggs, sturgeon eggs, actually. And, considered delicacy. And so, yeah, conspicuous consumption, hedonism. Oh, yeah. And so the Romans would go to these banquets, shovel food and wine down their gullet, much as they could, enjoying the taste, and then they would be full. And then, but man, I really like eating this stuff. In the banquet hall, there'd be an adjoining room called the vomitorium. Guess what they did in there? Oh, yes. You go into the vomitorium, and there is a giant vat, which, of course, is for you to cack in. And you have servants there, and servants have two things, a feather and a towel. They hand you the feather, you ram that down your throat, trigger the gag reflex, cack, take the towel, clean yourself up, and guess what? Turn around, go back, and do it all again. You see, that's, yeah. It's called Epicureanism. We'll talk about it more later on. But the point is, and I mean, that poem by the poet Sappho, let's read this. The poet Sappho, page 44, shall we? I wish you all were here so I wouldn't have to do this. So, yes, Sappho. Here we go. Sappho, the Greek poet. Some say cavalry, and some would claim infantry or a fleet of long oars is the supreme sight on the black earth. I say it is the girl you love and easily proved. Did not Helen, referring to Helen of Troy, whom we'll come to know, who was queen of mortal beauty, Helen was the face that launched 1,000 ships, choose as first among mankind the very scourge of Trojan honor. In other words, Paris. Haunted by love, she forgot her kinsman, her own child, and wandered off to a remote country. Oh, weak and fitful woman, bending before any man. That's a nice way of saying, sleeps around. Bending before any man. So, Anacoria, although you are far, do not forget your loving friends. And I, for one, would rather listen to your soft step and see your radiant face than watch all the dazzling horsemen and armored hoplites. Hoplites, a word to remember. Hoplites were Greek infantry of Lydia. And that is the end of that poem. Yes. Yeah, the Greeks were hedonistic. They were all about getting it on, partying. In fact, the Greeks had a god, Bacchus, the god of wine and partying. And the Greek goddess Aphrodite, whom most people know of as Venus, they call her the goddess of love. She wasn't the goddess of love, she's goddess of sex. Because you see, the Greeks had this idea that, you know, if you need to procreate and make children, then you need a woman. But if you want to have a love relationship, women are too stupid. If you want to have a love relationship, and I mean, the Greeks have a word for it, it's called agape love, the kind of love where souls meet, the kind of love where you would give your life for this person, you care about the way they feel, you care about the way they think. The Greeks felt that, women were not worthy of that, that if you want to have that kind of love, you should find another man. Fact of the matter is, there was a story of a woman who her son was a great athlete, a great runner, very fast. And he was to go to the Olympics. The first Olympics were held on Mount Olympus in Greece, where athletes from all the little city states came and had games to honor Zeus. And this woman's son was really fast, and she wanted to see him run the race. But the problem was, Greek women weren't allowed to go out in public, and they sure couldn't go to this. And so the mother disguised herself. She trussed up her body so that she didn't have curves. And then she, of course, wore a hood, and she disguised herself and went and watched her son run the race. Of course, he won, and she was so jubilant that she ran down the hill. And as running down the hill, she tripped. And when she tripped, her tunic, and a tunic, by the way, is just a long t-shirt. Her tunic flew up and everything was revealed, and they killed her because women should not go to athletic events, according to Greek society. So, what did the Greeks call themselves? Remember that the Greeks call themselves literally, and you're writing because it is on your test, literally, the Greeks call themselves the Hellenes, the people of the sun. In fact, that word Hellas there, that is the Greek word for the sun god, Apollo. We'll get to that later on. But yeah, Hellas, which is where we get our word helium, heliocentric, you know. Hellas. Hellas is the god of the sun, Apollo, and the Greeks call themselves Hellene, the Hellenes, meaning the people of the sun. Greek history is divided into two parts. You write this down, it is on your test. Number one, the Hellenic period of Greek history is the period of history, Greek history, that covers the period of time when Greece was divided up, not in one country, but thousands, literally thousands of small city-states. And they had this set up because if you've ever seen the topography of Greece, it might be, as the crow flies, 20 miles from one town to another. But to traverse those 20 miles, you've got to go around a mountain that will take you 100 miles. You see what I'm saying? And so a lot of these cities were very isolated and independent, and they were called city-states, or the Greek word is the polis, Polis. And that period of history where the Greece was divided up in thousands of city-states is called the Hellenic period of Greek history. Now, after that comes the Hellenistic period of Greek history. What was the Hellenistic period? The Hellenistic period of Greek history, and we'll talk about this later on, but it was when this guy named Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great, who many people just, he was Greek. He wasn't Greek. Alexander the Great was not Greek. But when he was a child, his tutor, who educated him, was Aristotle, one of the great Greek philosophers who had been captured. Alexander the Great was actually Macedonian. If you ever look at it on the map, Greece is here, Macedonia is up here. Alexander the Great was Macedonian, and he was educated by Aristotle. And Alexander the Great fell in love with Greek culture, and because of that, he when he set about conquering the world, he said, "I'm going to make the world Greek. Everything that we do, everything that these people do," and we'll talk more about this later on in detail. He said, "All the places my army conquers is going to be Greek. Speak Greek, have Greek customs, grease yourself, get naked, grease yourself up, and wrestle." I'm not lying. Yeah, be Greek. And that is called the Hellenistic period, and it runs from, I think, the 3rd century BC to 31 BC. It's called the Hellenistic period. But we'll talk about that later on. And that's all I'm going to talk about today. So that's a good start to this unit. We're going to do and see a lot of stuff about the Greeks because they are a very important civilization. And with that, I'm going to go. It has been wonderful talking to you. I'll see you tomorrow.